Borada Baub. Good morning, everyone. And good morning to those of you who are joining us on live stream or later on YouTube too. We are gathering on a beautiful morning, a beautiful sunny morning, and your faces are surprisingly awake and alive considering we have 1 hour less sleep. So well done, and we will look to see if anyone joins us in an hour and quietly judge them with love. But Betty nearly forgot we're here, but she's here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So our service today will include our church meeting. The way it's going to work is that the start of the service is going to look very much almost identical to a normal service, which is as the live streamers are with us. And then later on we'll move seamlessly into our church meeting. We always have worship within our church meetings anyway, as we think the discussion, the discerning of God's voice, of God's guidance to us takes place within worship, so it seems appropriate that we do that with each other today. A reminder of other factors. As we walk around, we're guided, we're recommended still to wear our masks, and while we're singing. But as you're sat down, listening, even talking, just sat where you are welcomed, if you feel comfortable, to take your masks off. It's all about personal preference. We know that different people have different underlying medical issues, different perceptions of risk, so please do as you feel comfortable, and we respect each other's preferences when it comes to that. I think they're the pre-notices. So with all that ringing in our ears, masked, at home, here, let's take a breath, and I'll light the candle as a recognition that wherever we are, however we feel this morning, whatever today means to us, that God is with us. So to all mums and mothers, nines and grannies, God says welcome. To fathers, tides and grampses, to uncles, aunts and cousins, God says welcome. To sons and daughters, sisters and brothers, God says welcome. Whoever we are, wherever we are, whatever our story, we are welcomed into God's presence afresh. And so we begin our worship this morning with our first hymn, a hymn written by one of our own and played on the organ by John Henson. We listen or sing along to "In Love Divine We're Standing." The new lyrics have given confusion, but all is now well. So we stand as we are able and sing with our masks on to "In Love Divine We're Standing, we do not need to fear."
In love divine we're standing.
Please be seated. And we thank Michael for that version and for John for playing and putting up with my miscommunication there. As always, you're encouraged to look at the newsletter, whether you get that sent to you by email or delivered. Lots of important news and information, including those who we want to particularly think of. We will have a time of pastoral news later when the live stream has ended. But also those who we want to celebrate with. For example, there may be people, perhaps even amongst us, perhaps on the back row, sitting next to Elsie, who are celebrating a birthday with a 0 in this week. And so we definitely wish Sue a very happy, what must be 60th, surely birthday. But please do have a look at that. While we're on notices then, because we're going slightly into the church meeting, if there are any apologies that we know of, Linda has got the clipboard at the ready. We've already noted a few, and we'll have the clipboard at the back at the end in case you remember another. But otherwise, feel free to shout out now, and we'll jot it down. Sure. And there may be a few who can't join us today because of Mothering Sunday. Yeah. So, fab. If there aren't many other shout-outs, if you speak to Linda at the end, and we've got some already. Fab. Okay, matters arising. We haven't met for church meeting, I should say, since our AGM, which I think was in September. We were due to meet in January, but that was when the Omicron peak was just about to come. So, with that in mind, I'm guessing you all have a detailed and photographic memory of the last church meeting. Hopefully you had a chance, though, to look at the minutes for those who are more particularly interested in that. Were there any questions or clarifications from that? Is everyone happy for me to sign the minutes of the last meeting? Wonderful, let's keep going. And most matters arising will come up later in the service, later in the meeting, but the one to highlight now, our environmental policy. We spoke about it at the last meeting. We haven't taken it forward too much because things have been slightly interrupted, and questions of what we're doing with the building are still very much up in the air. We will be, in fact I may as well say that now, we do have a card for Ben Walkling, because Ben is moving tomorrow. As we know, Ben is doing his PhD in Swansea University, and he's moving out to Swansea tomorrow morning. Made a little bit more complicated by the fact that Simon has COVID, so we think of them as they navigate that. But we will wish Ben well. He says he will be back. I don't know whether he's planning to come back for regular Sunday lunches and washing of clothes, or... but he's looking forward to seeing people both on Zoom and in person, but we wish him well. Ben was heading up our environmental considerations. So this is just an encouragement. If anyone here has a particular passion for environmental issues, if there are one or two people that might want to head that up for us as a church, please do have a think. We've all got a part to play. But if that is a particular passion of yours, please let me or Linda know. And we'll talk about it more. We do have, from our synod, an eco box with many ideas for services and seeds of hope and all sorts of things, which we will use in the coming weeks and months. But if anyone wants to tackle this particularly, let me know. And we are, in the meantime, we're not just leaving it to those people, we are pursuing what we can do at the moment. So, for example, this is breaking news. Next month, I will have the same mobile phone number, but Linda has finally got me to get a new contract, and it will be through EcoTalk, where a lot of the money goes to the RSPB. So we're doing our bit as we can, when we can. And there is coming up the idea of a litter pick. So we are hoping, some of us, to do a litter pick, possibly up on the way to Llanwano, and so possibly ending up either with a meal at the pub or a service at the church. We'll see, maybe a bit of both. Are there any other notices of any other business? We haven't received any, and I think everyone has an eye on the time, so good. Right, tick. Well, with that, then, we will come to our reading for today. And today's lectionary reading is from the Gospel according to Luke, and I do think it's particularly appropriate for a church meeting. Jesus has been getting grief from the religious leaders because he's hanging around with people of questionable reputation. That's not me suggesting you have questionable reputation. We'll wait till we see what the content is. In response to the gripes that he's receiving, Jesus tells them a few stories, including the now renowned parable of the prodigal son. Or should it be lost son? Or lost and found son? And who says the troublemaker should get top billing anyway? And what about the other son? Or the dad? And who's missing? Let's keep some of these questions in mind then, as we listen to a less familiar, perhaps, version of a familiar tale. And I look to Vivienne, because I can't remember who's reading today. Betty, wonderful. I was covering you, but I like that, Vivienne. Are you, so, fabulous. Yeah, go for it, Betty.
The reading is Luke chapter 15, 11 to 31, and from Good as New. Jesus told them this story. Once there was a man with 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Dad, let me have the money you intend leaving me in your will." So the father made over to both sons the share of his estate he had decided to leave them. A few days later, the younger son packed his bags and went abroad. Away from home, he soon went through his money, living without a thought for the next day. At the very moment his money ran out, there was a slump in the country where he was living, and there were no jobs worth having. All he could get was a job on a farm, looking after some pigs. Sometimes he was so hungry, he felt like eating the pig food. No one took pity on him. Finally, he came to his senses and said, "Back home, the workers on Dad's farm get as much food as they need and more. But I'm dying of hunger. I've had enough of this job. I'm going home to Dad. And this is what I'll say to him. Dad, I've led a selfish life and I've treated you shamefully. I'm not fit to be thought of as your son. Please give me a job on the farm. I'll do anything." So he made his way back home to his father. His father saw him coming in the distance, and his heart melted at the sight of him. He ran towards him and hugged and kissed him. Then the son began the speech he'd prepared. "Dad, I've led a selfish life, and I've treated you shamefully. I'm not fit to be thought of as your son." But his father said, "We must get him into some decent clothes right away. My new jacket, I haven't worn it yet. I'm sure it'll fit him. And I've got a bright shirt and some new shoes to go with it. Let's have a big party and get some good food in. I thought my son was dead, but here he is, alive. I thought I'd lost him forever, but he's back where he belongs." At the time the party was getting into full swing, the older son was out working in the fields. On his way back to the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He stopped to ask those standing in the doorway what was going on. They said, "Your brother's come home, and your father's throwing a party to celebrate his safe return." The older son was furious and refused to go in. So his father came out and tried to persuade him. But he said to his father, "I've been working my fingers to the bone for you all these years, and I've always done whatever you asked me to do. When have you had a party for me, so I could have a good time with my friends? But this worthless son of yours comes home after wasting all your money on wild adventures, and no expense is spared to make him welcome. The father said, "My boy, I got you with me all the time. Everything I have is yours as well. It's right for us to have a party and to be happy. He's not just my son, he's your brother. We'd given him up for dead, but he's alive, and we thought we'd lost him, but he's come back home."
I think John's version of that brings it alive, particularly so when read by Betty with that enthusiasm. And I wonder then how you heard that story today. I wonder if you thought, "Oh, I know this one," and slightly switched off. Or I wonder if there were phrases that stood out to you, or whether you empathise with one particular character. I wonder, thinking back to last week's sermon, whether it disturbed or comforted you. For many people, it would be the latter. Most takes on this story, from Rembrandt's famous painting to my own previous reflections on it, and I've done a link for those online in case they want to go back and read a previous reflection. Most takes understand the story to be an encouraging tale of God's reckless love and extravagant grace. And whilst that's true, of course, when I read it this week, I got something very different from it. You see, before sharing this story, Jesus is, as I said earlier, on a roll. He's responding to the puritanical condemnation of his enjoyment of life, and he responds to that condemnation with stories about loss. First, the lost sheep, then the lost coin, and now, completing the rule of three, he tells the story of a father and two sons, usually entitled The Lost or Prodigal Son. But what if the story is actually about a loss of a different sort? Mothering Sunday is as good a time as any to ask, where exactly is Mum? Is her absence more than just a patriarchal omission? Could Jesus' parable even have guided the original audience to the story of their founding family? Of another father who played favourites, of his dreamer son who fell out with his siblings and was lost to a foreign famine-hit land, and of the beloved wife whose death had untold consequences. Think Jacob, Joseph, Rachel and co. In short, what impact would it have if we had been told that the mother in the family had died? Could it be that unspoken grief is actually woven throughout the story? If we imagine this into the story, what might we learn? Once there was a man with two sons, says Jesus. The younger one said to his father, "Dad, let me have the money you intend leaving me in your will." So the father made over to both sons the share of his estate. For the younger son, then, the shadow of his father's death is, perhaps with good reason, felt in the present. So he dares to speak it and receives what was coming to him before he cuts himself off from friends, family and home, going to another country without a second thought. Could it be that the family home was crowded by grief that was almost tangible, constant, and too much to bear for the younger son? Could it be that, like many grieving, he just needed to get away, to distract himself, to lose himself in drink, in sex, in travel, anything to numb his pain inside? And what about the father who enabled this to happen? We hear nothing of a conversation between the two of them, not a word of dialogue asking his son why he wanted his inheritance early, why he wanted to leave his family and run away to a strange and dangerous land. Could it have been that it was easier for the dad to meet the wild demands of his son rather than meet his emotional needs? There does, after all, seem to be a lack of communication in the family. Just look what happens when the son returns. "We must get him into some decent clothes right away," the dad says to his servants. "My new jacket, I haven't worn it, I'm sure it will fit him. And I've got a bright shirt and new shoes to go with it. Let's have a big party and have some good food in." Notice anything strange there? The father doesn't speak directly to his son. Instead, he speaks to his servants. Rather than listening to his son, rather than asking how he's been or acknowledging his lived experience, rather than talking to him about the emotional depths through which they've both swum, the father is quick to get him changed out of the clothes which carry that painful story and put on a party frock instead. It seems like partying to avoid pain runs in the family. So let's not mention your mother. Let's not talk about Bruno, a reference for the Pixar fans there, and Encanto, a film which actually has a lot of reverence here. No, instead of talking about these things, let's eat, drink, and be merry, forgetting our troubles and forgetting our other children, it seems. For one brother is still out working in the field when the party is in full swing. I mean, what's that about? He's the one that stuck by his dad. He's the one that stayed at home all this time. He's the one that might have put his own dreams and his own grief on hold, who's had to take control of the accounts because his dad couldn't cope with it, or who's dealt with his dad's mood swings and heard his dad weeping at night, all the while his brother's off having a whale of a time. So this guy is physically and emotionally exhausted when instead of weeping, he hears music. Perhaps his loyalty and support of his dad has finally paid off. Perhaps his dad has turned a corner and wants to choose life again. Or perhaps his dad has even put on a feast for him to say thanks for all his love and help through the difficult times. But no. His ungrateful and selfish brother has returned, and his dad is indulging him yet again, and true to form, the real rock of the family, the older son, has been forgotten and taken for granted. And then, when the older brother expresses his anger, when, unlike his dad, an immature brother, he's actually able to articulate how he feels, his dad, as usual, doesn't want to hear his hurt, and instead makes it all about his brother yet again. And so the older brother has no choice to knock back a cocktail of jealousy and anger, pain and grief instead. What a welcome back. Well, perhaps it could have gone like that. And perhaps it's no great leap to think why I can see the story in this way. But as Jesus would have known and practiced, sketching in the possible details of tales from Torah was a common practice of his storytelling people and their relationship with Scripture. And I think doing likewise can help us live into the text. Imagine it as a real story today. But so what? We might be thinking, what does imagining the story in that way achieve? How is it anyway relevant to a church meeting service? Well, I happen to think that a story of a screwed up family dealing with loss, pain, and miscommunication is very relevant to our church meeting. I think the story of men who don't listen and women who are absent, of children who avoid difficult truths and others who feel exhausted and increasingly resentful about keeping the family household going, is, if anything, a little too on the nose for us. Like church families across Wales, across the UK, and across the Western world today, we have many difficult decisions and discussions to have about who we are as a smaller church in an increasingly secular post-COVID world, which isn't suggesting that we throw in the towel, as I happen to think that there are many advantages about being a smaller church. I actually think it might be closer to what Jesus intended, and the metaphor of reducing the stock to leave a richer, more vibrant remnant, I also think has something to it. Yet we do have losses to name and challenges to face, and doing that as a family can be bloomin' hard. One of the lessons that I learnt through losing my mother, aged 13, was that my dad wasn't a superhero. Kind? Sure. Generous? Absolutely. But man, was he out of his depth when it came to emotional literacy. After my mum died, a bit like in the family story we heard today, we didn't really talk about how we were doing or how we were feeling. Any attempt to share pain or express anger was quietly and politely ignored. And that's not what a grieving teenager needs. And so for a while, I resented my dad for that. I mean, like the father and younger son in the story, I was more than happy to put on a smile and party over the pain, but you have to clear up the mess sometime. And at times, there was a lot of mess to clear up. Yet as I grew and matured and began to process the grief, it was clear to me that my dad did his absolute best. An only child to divorced parents in the 1950s, he was sent off to boarding school at an early age. and never really learned how to articulate pain, how to talk about his emotions. Keep calm and carry on was the mantra of the day. That's how he dealt with his grief, and so he naturally expected us to do the same. And over time I came to understand this, that we are all products of our upbringing and context, that sometimes we simply haven't been given the tools that would benefit others, that sometimes we hurt or frustrate one another from a place of our own brokenness, and that we need to treat one another and ourselves with an unceasing amount of grace. That's what today's parable says to me. That the family may have hurt each other unwittingly, that denials and egos, pain avoidance and emotional immaturity led to strains and stresses within the family, but they were still family, still held together by bonds of love and loyalty that no trauma or crisis could ever break. Still invited to eat together, work together, party together, naming their hurts and forgiving them. And isn't this the picture of the church that Christ calls us into? Isn't this the life of grace into which we're welcomed? So if today, in the meeting, or in the coming months, if I or another church member resemble the father of the story, unable to listen, unable to accept the loss in our midst, perhaps you can treat us with grace, sketching in our backstory, seeking to forgive the hurt we might cause, and trying to appreciate the qualities we might bring. And if I or another church member resemble the younger son of the story, running away from the truth and leaving the hard work to others, perhaps you can treat us with grace, acknowledging the fear that lies behind our resistance to change, seeking to forgive the hurt we might cause and looking for the good we might bring to the family. And if I or another church member resemble the older son of the story, resentful of siblings and refusing to join the party, perhaps you can treat us with grace, taking some of the burdens from us, seeking to forgive the hurt we might cause and giving thanks for all we do for the family. It won't be easy. We will not always succeed. We may need to take deep breaths, pray for patience, swallow or speak our frustrations at different times, but we will do so as a family, as a broken yet beautiful brood of prodigal sons and daughters, as screwed up siblings of the preacher who parted with screw-ups, the friend who forgives the frustrating, the Christ whose grace and goodness might reform and transform us afresh this day. May it be so. On Monday of this week, as I walked to the church buildings in the morning sunlight, I had great fun composing an email to someone within our wider church family. We're talking a committee chair in London here who had frustrated me. The passive aggressiveness that I was composing in my head was breathtaking and giving me a lot of fun. And I was enjoying imagining their pompous reaction when they'd receive it. When my 8 a.m. alarm went, which signalled my time to pray my Lenten prayer. You know, the make me a channel of your peace one. The one about bringing pardon where there is offence, union where there is discord. Nothing, unfortunately, about sarcastic emails. So I reluctantly listened to what I thought God was telling me. And seeing as it was helpful to me, I thought we might pray it together now. As we say the words, I encourage you to think how you might live them out, or won't live them out, in the coming day. Let's say together the prayer on the screen. Living God, thank you for the gift of this moment. Please help us be aware of our grounding in you. In this time of great uncertainty, as our churches face difficult discussions and decisions, please make each of us an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us bring love. Where there is offence, let us bring pardon. Where there is discord, let us bring union. Where there is error, let us bring truth. Where there is doubt, let us bring faith. Where there is despair, let us bring hope. Where there is darkness, let us bring your light. Where there is sadness, let us bring joy. Where there is darkness, let us bring your light. Where there is sadness, let us bring joy. O Master, let us not seek as much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that one receives, it is in self-forgetting that one finds, it is in pardoning that one is pardoned, it is in dying that one is raised to eternal life. Amen. And it's at this point that we're going to say goodbye to our live streamers and YouTubers. So go well, have a blessed week. And as Robert sorts that, I invite Linda and Colleen to come up to the front.